Hi, hello, my name is Elena. Here we talk about books, what I've been reading, what I'm currently reading, what I'd like to read. This is a recap of May. I read 8 books in May. Not going to go into full detail on all of them, but the ones that stood out. The first book I read was a tiny book, At Night, All Blood is Black by David Diop. And this was a harrowing, tiny little book, read it in one sitting, about a soldier who starts experiencing sort of a breakdown in his psyche after he denies his friend on the battlefield a mercy death. His friend asks 3 times for him to kill him, and he denies him. Oh, what? Bible reference? Oh, what? Okay. And after this death, he starts to mutilate the hands of the enemy across no man's land. And he's riddled with guilt and shame because not only does he feel responsible for not honoring his friend by killing him, he feels responsible for his death because they are from 2 different tribes in Senegal, and the friend's last name is something that resembles a peacock, and the main character, his tribe is a tribe of the lion. And before the commander rings the alarm to attack, he makes a joke to his friend saying, what kind of last name is it to be associated with a peacock? And his friend leaps out and says essentially, like, I'll show you what a peacock I am. And that is his first wound that eventually kills him. So once he starts mutilating the hands, I think he mutilates about 8 hands of the enemy soldiers. At first he's lauded by his fellow soldiers, and then quickly they start fearing him and think that he is being possessed by a devil spirit. He is sent behind at the back of the battalion to recuperate with a doctor who has him draw memories from his dreams as he's unraveling and dealing with his guilt. So I feel like if I were teaching a course in European history, or specifically on the World War, I would definitely recommend this novel as a supplemental reading. It was definitely worth a read, and I would be curious to read more from this author. The next book I read was The Garden of Evening Mists by Tan Tuan Eng, and I ended up purchasing it after I read it as a hold from the library because it's definitely a book that has been sitting with me, and one of the reasons why I haven't filmed in so long, because I keep thinking that I just need a little bit more time to think on it, to get my thoughts together, to form cohesive sentences and do this book justice. But I might not, and guess what? That's okay. That's okay. But I will say this, the author does a splendid job at capturing the story of Yunling To. It's essentially metered out in 3 timelines, and we meet her as she is retiring from the federal bench. She became a judge, and she's retiring 2 years earlier at the surprise of her colleagues. And one thing they don't know is she's retiring because 3 neurosurgeons have confirmed she has aphasia. Not to be confused with dementia. Aphasia is essentially she gets blackouts, she cannot verbalize her own name at times or move a pen. And so she started to notice this, and after confirmation, she has decided to return to a place that the main portion of this novel takes place in 1951, British Malaya, which is now Malaysia. But I'm solely unfamiliar with the history and the time. So getting to know about that a little more, delving into the history and the various elements of partisan factions happening was really interesting. I think it enhanced the novel and not, just made it seem more violent than necessary. I think everything in this novel is mentioned in a way that ties into the larger story, but there are so many intersections here between art, war, trauma, memory, and the juxtaposition of the prose in this between the Japanese art of gardening, for example, or yujiri, is so finite with the factions that are fighting in the jungles. They are killing hundreds of people a day, and Yan Ling actually witnesses some of this violence. But she arrives when she's 28, 1951, because she wants to ask a Japanese gardener who was a gardener, the last Japanese gardener to the emperor, to build a Japanese garden in honor of her sister. And he refuses her. He says, I'm not going to do it. But after hearing her story about why she wants to build a garden in memory of her sister, he agrees to have her be an apprentice. And so, of course, she has a long-standing hatred towards the Japanese. We find out that she is a lone survivor of a brutal Japanese war camp. And in this war camp, she was kidnapped and transported along with her sister. And it's about 100 pages left of the novel until we actually find out what happened in this war camp. But from then on, she has been working towards trying Japanese war criminals in attempts to find this camp, because no one knows where she was held. They were blindfolded, they were put in cattle cars, transported, and she doesn't even remember where it was. But she sees several Japanese war criminals hanged. And so it's interesting that she agrees to be an apprentice to a Japanese gardener when she has such irascible anger and hatred towards that nation. But it is truly, reading this book, there are moments where it almost feels like I've come to the top of the yoga mat and I'm going to sit down and meditate. It feels like a quiet meditation, but then there's this cacophony of violence happening in the jungles as people are being killed and used as bait towards the government, whether it's Chinese, whether it's the British. But essentially, she ends up staying with this gardener, Aritomo, after the violence gets to a peak, and they form a relationship, which is also a thing of beauty and captured impeccably in this novel. But this story is interspersed with so many more. There's a story in here about two kamikaze pilots who fall in love, and one of them sacrifices themselves for the other. And the essence of human loss human loss and guilt and shame, just like with David Diop's novel. Like, how do those who survive, how do they live? It's one thing to survive and live, but there's also this surviving the memory, surviving the trauma, surviving your own guilt and shame. And this is something that, as she is being apprenticed to Aritomo, Yaling is beginning to sort of capture and fight internally with her demons. And there's, again, it's almost a little bit of a surreptitious play with the author, between the author and the reader, because he only gives certain amount of details, certain information as we build this relationship onward. And as we get to know these characters more, that's when the author allows the reader into the lives, like the intricacies, the secret meanderings and the cogitations of like how we are as we are. And so it's a beautiful novel. I do recommend it. Again, there's violence in here, and we learn that her sister in this Japanese war camp was essentially a prostitute, a sex slave to the Japanese soldiers. And so one sister survives and one with the others does not. But her sister makes Yeonmi promise her that if there ever arose an opportunity where she could flee, that she would run and not look back. And it's that run and don't look back that Yeonmi is coming to terms with in this novel, and it's a thing to behold. So definitely recommend this. I actually also ordered The Gift of Rain by this author, which is his first book, and then he has a new one coming out in October that I look forward to reading as well, but definitely want to delve into his repertoire because I do like his style of writing. I also read Adele by Layla Slimani. I read The Perfect Nanny when it came out, and this, in a sense, is also about a woman who becomes to unravel as she is living her life. She's a mother, she's a wife, she's a journalist, and I think that there's tendencies of bipolar here. She's somewhere on the spectrum. She has this high mania of need for sex. She starts having sex with strangers in alleyways and hating herself and the very act of sex afterwards, but that insatiable hunger to have more, to be needed, is definitely is similar to The Perfect Nanny in that way. So I wasn't astounded by the book, but I enjoyed it. Also read Dawn by Octavia Butler. That was a book club pick. There's something about Dawn that sort of reminded me of Avatar. It's sort of like the speculative fiction. It's a part of a trilogy, so I would be interested actually to read the second book in the trilogy, but there's time. We'll get to it. Red Foster by Claire Keegan. That finally came in. That's been on hold at the library since December. I'm not going to talk much about it because everyone has read it. Everyone has talked about it. I agree with everyone. It's a riveting story. And then I read When We Were Sisters by Fatima Asghar. Also had to return it to the library, but 3 sisters are orphaned. Their mother dies earlier and their father raises them to a point, but then he is murdered in a freak accident. and the uncle, or their mother's brother, ends up acting as their guardian, but he is a shady character. This book pissed me off. I was pissed the entire time. One thing that I love that the author did was she redacted the name of the uncle, so it would say uncle and there'd just be a redacted mark for his name. But they end up raising themselves. He takes their government paycheck that they get, as assisted living from their father, and uses it for his schemes and plotting. And he has another family, and so he keeps them separate. And it is very clear that he only uses them when he needs the money. He has these moments or spurts of moments when he's like, oh, I'm a good uncle, I'm a good uncle. But essentially he is not. And it's a beautiful story. Honestly, I read it reads so much almost like poetry. I read it so fast, but the narration of the sisters, how they grow up in the American school system, how, they start having periods together, how they, start testing out like nicknames and calling each other, and how they are very much of one spirit, but they are three very separate individuals, and that is okay. That is as life should be, but their bond is a thing of beauty. And I love that the author marries that with the concept of individuals over time, but also who we are, like where we come from, trying to fit in when you are clearly other, right? But then you're also other from that other, and so there's just so many separations. And seeing the interesting one of the sisters is not cisgender, and so it's interesting to see her form these attachments to various characters, a boy and a girl. And it's heartbreaking to see that the sisters obviously grow apart because they are separate and they're different individuals, but that bond is still very much there. That sort of like congeals over everything else. But it was, I really enjoyed reading this novel. I also read Greek Lessons by Han Kang. I have The Vegetarian sitting on my shelf up there for a few years now. I'm getting to it. But this novel is also beautiful. A relationship between two people, a Greek professor who is going blind and his pupil who loses her ability to speak, and their lives intersect, and we find out their paths, their traumas, their limitations. But as much as they are limited with their disabilities, how does one cross that border to expand upon humanity? That's what the author does well capturing here. Okay, so he's able to speak, but she's not able to reply to him, but she can write on his hand. She can help him get to the optometrist. So there's essentially how we have our limitations, but we're so much more than that in the overall scheme of humanity, and that's a thing of beauty. Last book I read in May, of course, was probably the best, the faves, The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. I am making my way through Elena Ferrante. I think I only have 2 books of hers left to read, Front Mogillia and The Lying Life of Adults. Love this book. So for those of you who have not read Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir, I read that years ago, shattered me. It really did, actually. I had like a thing of tissues right beside me because she even references it in this book, and I think "woman destroyed" is mentioned. That terminology is used quite a few times in this short novel. But Olga is left. Her husband leaves her and her 2 children for a younger model, so to speak, but he used to tutor her when she was a teenager. Creepy. And at first she thinks like, oh, he's just a man, he'll be back. But as time goes on, she begins to unravel or transition. And this book is about all of those emotions, all those fragments, all of those selves just exploding. And Elena Ferrante does this so well. She marries like the concept of self, of this mother, of this nurturer, and then she's able to sort of dissect these layers. She allows her to be more than just a mother. She allows her irascible anger, her obsession, her thinking of like the various sex that her husband is having with this younger person. And she compares herself to someone that she knew in her building that everybody made fun of when her husband left her, and she was young at the time, and everyone sort of thought of her as like a little bit of a witch and crazy. And now she's going through this. And so it's almost like she crosses this line into other woman, right? Because she's not the only woman who's been left. But it's over like a 4-month period that she is experiencing all of these various emotions, as she's supposed to care for these children, as she's supposed to find her new identity. But like the violence of just like the explosion of the brokenness, like break something, and here I am. This is a fragment. Women contain multitudes. So it's chef's kiss. I really enjoyed it, of course, because we love Ferrante here, as most people do. So what I'm currently reading as June is underway is Melina by Ingberg Bachmann. The New York Times said that this was a genius. I'm 90 pages in, and I don't get it. I want to unlock what is in this novel. I'm sticking with it. I'm going to finish it. I am determined. But this was originally published in German in 1971. The world is stretched to the very limits of language. An unnamed narrator, a writer in Vienna, is torn between 2 men. Viewed through the tilting prism of obsession, she travels further into her own madness, anxiety, and genius. Melina explores love, death styles, the roots of fascism, and passion. I'm trying. I'm gonna unlock this puppy. But if you've read this and you get it, please comment below. Help somebody. I don't know. It's definitely the written in fragments. She writes letters to a president, to other people she's interviewed, but we don't know the questions, just the answers. So it's a tough one to follow. I can follow like the basis foundation of her obsession with Ivan or Ivan. I'll figure it out. But that was my reading in May. Hopefully June will have more things in store. Let me know any books that you have read that you've loved. Some you've hated. You can hate on this channel. That's fine. And hopefully I will see you in the next one. Keep reading, friends. Bye.